Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. More than 1 million people registered to vote over the weekend, says the Independent Electoral Commission. Today we speak to Mosotho Meapia, SA's South Africa's Chief Electoral Officer, about voter registration and the upcoming elections. After that discussion, we will, as usual, name and shame our loser of the week. But first, the top news stories of the week with Stephen Grootes, EWN Senior Political Reporter and Author, and Thulasizwe Simelane, eNCA Senior Reporter. Thulasizwe, let me start with you. Guys, both of you, welcome to the show. President Jacob Zuma gives his State of the Nation address on Thursday evening, as usual at 7 p.m., as he decided to do. It's an election year. What significance does this particular SONA have for him?
Well, it's going to be one of two State of the Nation addresses that will be done this year. And my expectation is that he's unlikely to want to, sort of upstage himself, to sort of give too much away before the election. So this one will most likely focus on the conversation we've been having over the last few months, that we have a good story to tell, looking back on the last 20 years, which is the message that the ANC is driving really strong in this election. So
Thulasizwe, let me interrupt you. You're saying that this will be a lame duck State of the Nation. He'll use it to election year to say, look how good I've done, look at the past 20 years, and that's what...
I suspect that it will be a message that says we've achieved so much, now it's a matter of consolidation. Basically just reminding us how far we have come in the last 20 years. I don't expect that he will say a lot in terms of programs for the year. You saw this happening with the ANC, NEC Lekgotla, and then you saw it with the Cabinet Lekgotla. They sat down and it was the same exercise. Looking back over 20 years, we have a good story to tell. We've learned a lot of lessons in government. We are ready now for the next 20 years. It's only the second one that I expect that you
Stephen Grootes, President Zuma goes into this election with massive challenges. We've seen, according to police reports, that 32 protests a day all over South Africa. The economy is not doing that great. We're expecting about 2% growth. Unemployment still at 25%. All these things, shouldn't he be feeling that I need to give the message a forward march here?
I think so, and I think you've really got to look at sort of the urban-rural split. Some of the things you're talking about are very big in the media at the moment, but that is not how everybody in this country does their politics. In many parts of the country, it is about who you talk to. Your village votes almost as a group. Your community votes almost together. You go to the same branch meetings. So you've got to take that into context as well, and I think that's quite important. I think the other thing, and I do agree with Thulas about I think a lack of sort of promises this year, a lack of looking to the future in the State of the Nation. And when you look at last year's State of the Nation address, I was really struck. I was going through it today, at how few promises there were. There was hardly anything concrete where you could say this must happen by such and such a date. And I did think it's because so often, people like Thulas and I will go back and sort of go and tick them off. Did he make it? Did he not? Just before the State of the Nation. And I wondered if that was the reason. Maybe I'm too cynical.
Okay, let me ask you then, the two of you, Stephen, you go first. Are you going to go back to 2009 and say, President Zuma, you came in, massive win, 65.9%. These are the promises you made. And look particularly at the 5 years of the Zuma administration as opposed to the 20 years of ANC administration. Or shouldn't one even try to do that?
I think we should try and do that. It's quite tricky. You do have to go back quite far. You also have to take into account events. So when President Jacob Zuma, for example, promised 500,000 jobs and then the global recession of 2008 suddenly swept in, it would be unfair to hold him wholly responsible for not keeping to that promise. So you have to be quite nuanced. I'm sure Mac Maharaj would say that.
Absolutely. I mean, you're seeing that the ANC campaign is about conflation of the legacy, that it's 20 years is the same ANC that was in charge 20 years ago that is in charge over the last 5 years. But there are certain key things that we're going to have to hold President Zuma to. I mean, for instance, the whole issue of talking about re-engineering government and talking about a new approach in terms of national and centralized planning. That was one of the key things, if I remember correctly, back in 2009. And he has, as far as that is concerned, well, the NDP is on the table and not everyone is happy about it.
and performance monitoring and evaluation. What's Collins Jabane been doing for 5 years? Seriously, we have to ask the question.
Well, he has produced some interesting reports about who we are, what we look like, the state of poverty in South Africa. I think some good things have come out of that. But we went from 28 to 34 ministries, for example. Has that shown? Stephen?
I think in a way, you know, that was also about balancing of constituencies within the ANC. For example, why do we need so many ministers and ministries in the economic cluster? You have a finance minister, you have an economic development minister, you have a trade and industry minister. I mean, and sometimes it seems they just sort of disagree with each other. And then you look at the makeup of it. You have Pravin Gordhan sort of from the ANC, you have Ibrahim Patel from the unions, and then you have Rob Davies from the South African Communist Party. I mean, it really does look like balancing constituencies.
Well, you were talking about the performance monitoring and evaluation. I was thinking, you remember the whole publicity around the performance agreements that were signed by the ministers. What became of that? Was there any of those that were published, and did we hear anything further to say this minister, according to the agreement that he signed or she signed with the president, has done well or has not done well? The only things we get are the scorecards from the opposition and the media. So that's one of the things. And I remember we talked about a reconfiguration again of government, and it was promised in the January 8th statement, and I certainly expect that.
That said, I have to say, and I have to give it to him, President Zuma has fired, if you will, more ministers than any president we've had since 1994. And to his credit, some of them needed to go, Dinapula, for example, and others. But let's move on. Protests. We've had massive, massive protests over the past few weeks, going on over the past 3 months, over the past year. Is government in charge here, or Stephen?
I think there are some places where it really looks now like government is the enemy. People are turning on government. I mean, people don't burn a police station if they don't see that as a symbol of the state. And the same holds true for clinics and libraries. People are burning these places down, not because they want to burn down a library, but because it's the only symbol of the state that they have that's accessible, that isn't so hugely fortified. And so they're actually able to destroy it, and they're taking their anger out. You know, Jesse
What
Duarte,
are they angry about, Stephen?
I think there are a few things. It's not just a lack of services. It is about inequality. In other words, if you have electricity and water, you now think to yourself, well, why should I pay for them in the same way that someone who lives in Sandton does, if they have all the money and I don't? So there's a lot of inequality to this, and that, I think, brings the anger. It's not just about poverty. There are plenty of countries that are poorer than us, where the people live in a way that is, quite frankly, more poverty-stricken. They are poorer. They don't have the same anger because they don't necessarily have the same level of inequality.
You agree with that too?
You also, I agree with that, but you also have this trust deficit that we've been talking about between the elected representatives of the people. And I mean, government has done a lot of things to try and address that. You've had the whole ward committee system that was introduced, and it doesn't seem to be working for ordinary people on the ground. And also the councillors reporting back and holding report back meetings. It doesn't seem to be happening as often as it should be happening.
Quick point, both of you. Stephen, is anyone fueling these, or are they organic? Are they coming from these communities themselves? Is Julius Malema, as alleged by some people in the ANC, fueling these?
Well, I mean, on Thursday, Julius Malema told me straight off that he was not fueling these. The only way he was involved was, you know, sending lawyers to go and help the people arrested. The next day, I see photographs on my cell phone of an EFF truck, an Economic Freedom Fighters truck, dropping off tyres. And his response is, they aren't dropping them off to be burnt. They must have been tidying up the neighborhood. Seriously? Come on.
TX10February2014, Simelane, you get the last word.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt Julius Malema that there's so much disillusionment and disgruntlement. He seems to be targeting that particular disgruntled and disillusioned constituency. But to then explain it as something that's instigated by Julius Malema, I think it's too simplistic. Then we would have to explain it the same way. You know, since 2004, we've been seeing this escalation in violent service delivery protests, and Julius Malema was still in the ANC at the time.
TX10February2014, Simelane, Stephen Grootes, thanks so much for your time. Really fascinating stuff. After the break, we asked the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Mosotho Meapia, if our elections will be free and fair. Stay with us.
News that moves. eNCA.com.
Welcome back to the Justice Factor. The Independent Electoral Commission said on Sunday that early indications show that young people were heeding the call to participate in the elections, which mark the 20th year of our democracy. It estimated that there was total registration activity of about 1.2 million across the country. Initial indications show that about half of all visitors to registration stations yesterday were new voters aged 18 to 29 years old. To discuss this and other election issues, I'm joined by the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Mosotho Moepya. Mr. Moepya, welcome to the show, and thanks for coming through. Has it been a good weekend, this registration weekend?
I think so. I think it's been a good weekend. We have seen our operations being at best yesterday. If one looks at the registration weekend that we had in November, yesterday was the better day of all of the 4 days that we had. Our operations were solid. Our officials worked hard yesterday. Communities were very understanding. Floods, were workable yesterday. We didn't have as bad a situation in terms of the weather towards the close of registration yesterday. So we had a good afternoon. What
made people come out yesterday? And I don't know if you want to give me the numbers now. I'm waiting.
we will tell you the numbers tomorrow. My colleagues are hard at work now, finalizing the numbers. Safe for me to say, registration weekend, final registration weekend, is always the best weekend of the two, and the final day in that weekend is the best day ever.
Was it because President Zuma announced the election date on Friday, and that spurred people to go out and register?
It is so that when voters know that an election is imminent, they have a date in hand, and they do look at that as being the final opportunity. Of course, we do indicate that this is the final registration weekend, but the fact that there was a date helped a great deal, I must say.
People like me have been going around saying young people in South Africa are not interested in politics, they're not going to register to vote, and so forth and so forth. The youth vote in particular, the so-called born frees, did you see an uptick in that?
Oh yes, the greatest uptake in registration is clearly from the youth vote, and it will certainly prove you wrong, I'm afraid, Justice. We have a vibrant democracy in this country, and I do think that our young people are interested and they're participating.
What about violence? You had several incidents of people stopping other people from registering, attacking some of your registration stations. Are you worried about this?
Of course, you have to be concerned when people use violent means of protests. We do not say that people must not protest, but where violence is used, it's regrettable, and I think all of us in society must say so. We did, however, experience that, yesterday in particular, very peaceful, calm operating environment across the nation, where many of our colleagues were allowed to do the job that they were meant to do. And for that, we must thank the communities, leaders in those communities, the law enforcement agencies, yourselves in the media, and political parties, amongst
Isn't it
others.
time to change the system, though? Isn't it time to say, why should people have to register to vote when they have... You're making it hard for me to become a voter because you make me get an ID, then I have to go and register with you, then I have to pitch up on the day in my province to actually vote. So, for example, in 1999, I remember I was in the Eastern Cape, but I couldn't vote in Gauteng. I might be in Limpopo this year. Isn't it time for a discussion about this, in your view?
Well, we can have discussions, which will help us as a nation. But let me say this to you. If you compare the elections that we had in 1999, in fact, 1994, with the elections that, you had, the last elections that you had in 2011, it's chalk and cheese. No one election is the same as the other. And I think as South Africans, the issue in an election, it's no longer about the logistics of an election. I think as a nation we have come to terms with how an election should be organized. I think there are other issues that, that come into play when you talk about the preparations. And I think the debate that you want to raise, we probably have left a little bit behind. The debates for the future, in my view, would be the debate on how do we simplify, access to voting, registering and voting by South Africans. You will recall that last year, for that purpose, we considered and we called experts from around the world to look at other forms of registering and voting, and South Africans said to us, we like what we do. Continue to study what others are doing, but we like what we see you do.
Let's talk about your position as the IEC. I look at some of the events that have taken place over the past 6 months. I look at the Tlokwe election in particular, where one of your officials was suspended, but some of the issues that came out of there, false addresses being used, people being transported from outside of their wards to these wards to allegedly inflate one party's voting turnout. These are serious issues of credibility for you.
They are matters of a maturing democracy. When democracy matures, voters know what to do and what to expect. Those that have participated in the process must find ways of improving the participation of voters. Those that administer the elections must, in fact, look at new ways of running
these issues in Tlokwe in particular speak to the impartiality and independence of your institution, because it is alleged that IEC officials in cahoots with party officials, inflated voter numbers, help people from other wards to come into these wards. This could happen in this election too.
Justice, the matters you're talking about are before the courts, and I think you and I must respect that the courts in this nation will look at those issues and adjudicate.
I agree with you that the court must adjudicate, but an allegation has been made. I'd like to know how you respond to that allegation, that your officials in that particular region were not impartial at all. Mr. John Makodi is one allegation.
I'm saying to you that the matters are before the courts. The courts will deal with those matters and they'll make a finding. I'm saying to you that we should not be concerned by the fact that people take matters that concern them to courts. We are a nation that believes that these kinds of disputes must be resolved in terms of the law.
Aren't you worried about the credibility of your organization on this matter?
I think the credibility of the IEC is there for everyone to see. Even in the case that you're talking about, we have dealt with the matters openly and submitted our, what we needed to submit.
But if today I stand here and say to you that the issue of the public protector's finding on the chairperson of your organization is of deep concern to me, the fact that the public protector said her actions over the issue of the lease deal of your offices threatened the IEC's reputation as an impartial body. The fact that PW said you should turn their report to the police makes me wonder if at the very top allegations like these are not dealt with, for example, people being suspended, then I wonder what happens at my voting station down here in Joburg.
Two things, Justice. The first matter with the issue of the chairperson. Once again, these are matters that I'm not at liberty to talk with. There are people that deal with them. But except to say that you would know that these are also matters that are being dealt with through due processes, those processes will conclude and pronounce on them.
You're running an election, Mr. Mapia. Don't you think it would be in the interest of your job and your organization if the chairperson recused herself until these issues have come to closure?
No, I cannot deal with that matter, Justice, with the greatest respect. Those are matters that have due processes. I think measure us and look at what we do in terms of the outcomes of the work that we do. And I think in that respect, you're going to find that every one of us, our officials, are determined to do the work that they're meant to do.
Don't you think one bad apple tends to make the whole thing rot?
Justice, let's leave the matters in the processes that deal with them.
Mr. Tumiapia, thanks so much. Good luck with your work over the next 5 months or so. Sure. It's going to be tough. After the break, we give you our winner and loser of the week.
News that moves. eNCA.com.
Welcome back to the Justice Factor. Now to our winners and losers of the week. As usual, in this section, we aim to applaud politicians and individuals who've done well and name and shame those who continue to fail the people who put them in power. And so first, our winner of the week. We say a lot about young people in South Africa. We say they don't like politics. We say they don't register to vote. We say they don't realize that people died for them to enjoy the freedoms that we have today. But not all young people are like that. This weekend, the IEC said initial indications show that about half of all 1.2 million visitors to registration stations were new voters aged 18 to 29 years old. A spike in registrations was also reported at stations at or near universities and colleges, many of which opened for students this week. This means our young people are heeding the call to participate in our democracy. And so our winners of the week are the young people of South Africa. And now to our loser of the week. On Saturday, members of Julius Malema's economic freedom fighters admitted that they transported tires around the township of Hebron for protesters. A picture taken by a French press agency photographer showed young people with red berets on the back of an EFF-branded buggy apparently offloading tires to be burnt at a violent protest in Hebron near Pretoria. The buggy had a picture of Malema's face on it. What did Malema say about all this? He said, and I quote, "I don't know them. I just saw their picture on Twitter. I wouldn't conclude they were distributing tires. They might have been cleaning the streets," he said. What? They were cleaning the streets? This kind of protest should be condemned in the strongest terms. These people should be arrested and charged. And so, our loser of the week is Julius Malema and the EFF. What a bunch of losers. And with that, we come to the end of our show. Email us on justicefactor@enca.com. Follow us on Twitter on @JusticeMalala. And join us next week for more news, views, and debates. My name is Justice Malala. Have a fantastic week.
News that moves. eNCA.com.